data, but now we kind of don't really have a coherent story for how this kind of data and data that's, say, for example, coming from different kinds of sources might interact with each other, right? It's because we have like stuff like the profile data, and we don't really have any sort of we really don't have any way of talking about how these different things interact with each other, or how they work for that matter, right? So what I'd like to do is again try to kind of make that start to make that link be a little bit more, and it's a difficult problem, and so I'm just going to try to push through it in a straightforward a way as possible. So if we look at what happened before, we used to kind of have this notion that we would build some stuff at the beginning, and in fact we had this kind of debug variable stuff here, and you can see that the debug variable stuff is basically all gone now, right? We've eliminated all this debug variable stuff. We'd still like to be able to have stuff like this where we set these debug variables, right? I mean, that's something that we would kind of want to do. And so we have a couple different ways that we might want to go about doing that, and we could sort of think about this in a little bit more direct fashion. Right. So what we would like to do is we'd like to be able to have these, like, you know, before, when we were doing this, I had to write this code kind of out of line, right? So what we did is we went through, and in fact I can do this pretty simply. If I go to our debug config.h, right, we had this config file that was sort of written out by the debug system, and you can see in here all of the places that we actually had our debug system list, all of the UI things that we were going to do. So if I were to turn this off, if I were to say that we no longer get this, I would get, I would get essentially compile errors, presumably, or I thought that I would get compile errors, or maybe I won't get compile errors. Okay. I was assuming I would get compile errors where I saw these debug UI faux, like all of this stuff. I guess that's not actually true, because I guess they would be, I guess the way we were testing them, they would default to 0. I guess. I was surprised. I thought it actually might give me an error. But I suppose I could actually do something like this, presumably. No, I guess not. So what exactly is going on there? Why is that happening? I would like to know. I'm going to see exactly what we were doing. Maybe we just did if defined. Is that what we did? So you'd think that this would have caused some kind of a, yeah, like, I don't know. Let's see what happens here. So is there literally no way that I can force this sort of a thing to be erroneous? Maybe faux v4 is not a thing. Let's try this. There we go. All right, so that one's just not used. Okay, good. So this is what I can do then. To sort of give me a thing that would tell me everywhere that I was using one of these systems, right? And so here we can sort of see, like, okay, here's, you know, one of the debug variables and so on. So if I look at this and I go, well, what would I really have wanted to do here optimally? You know, is there something that's better than what's going on here that I was going to do? Now, what we found when we did our testing was that having an if, as long as the if was constant, really didn't make a huge deal. And so it's sort of like it's free as long as it's a perfectly predicted branch to do this instead. Looked like that was fine, right? It didn't look like that really cost us very much in any real way. And so one of the things that we saw when we were doing our debug system was that having to wait for it to recompile the game was just too long. Even though it only took like a second or two, it's like just not fast enough for what you want to be able to click the button and just be able to switch, and it didn't feel good and it wasn't nice, right? So what I'd rather have in this system is something that looks like this. You know what I'm saying? That would be preferable to me. And the question here is just how exactly would I go about doing something like this in the most convenient way possible? Because before, what had to happen is we had to have all of this stuff in there, and this system and was sort of a separate thing, right? And we had this whole thing I had to write. There was just a lot of business involved, right? And yeah, the usage code, the code at the usage site, nice and simple. No complaints with that, really. It was totally fine. But all of this nonsense garbage that was happening out here, just a lot of extra work that I maybe didn't want. And so since it's clear to me that we don't really need to go the compilation route, we tested it, it doesn't seem like it's that necessary. What we could do instead here is just do something like, like having this dribble all over ourselves. That's always a good thing. Just do something like, okay, if I've got something that I want to test here, you could imagine something like this. I don't know, something like this, or like a debug switch, and then I just pass like what the debug switch is that I actually want, right? And then this would be some macro that expands to whatever is necessary to make this be a switchable thing that I can switch at runtime, and add it to whatever list actually it needs to be added to. Or I can actually sort of say what that list might be that I might want to add it to. So for example, in here, show letting samples was part of the renderer. So I could do something like saying that it was part of the renderer, like that. So I can have sort of a hierarchical sort of a thing going on there. I could even do something a little more stringy, and maybe do something that was like a path, or even like a dot sort of a thing, or a colon. Right, you can sort of imagine me constructing something here. And that would be a lot kind of more interesting, because if I had something that worked like that, then it would be self-assembling, which is a lot more like the way the rest of the debug system is going, right? The profiling stuff just kind of dumps to a buffer. It would be kind of great if this stuff just dumped to a buffer as well. You know what I'm saying? So I would like to see if that is something that's on the table. I don't really know realistically how on the table it actually is. But I think it might be possible to do. The only thing that I'm not certain about is the way that this if works, I think might be a little bit too much, right? In other words, this I think could probably work. This I think probably could not, right? So it would probably have to look something like that. Which isn't really that big of a deal at the end of the day. But the reason that I say that it would probably have to look like something like that is because if you look at what will have to happen, oops, let's get interface there. If you look like what would have to happen in order for that to occur, we would need to do something where there would be a notion of some kind of a static variable, or some kind of something happening there, where we would have the debug system be able to cache a lookup so that every time through the code, it would not have to do anything more than just the basic if, right? So in theory, you know, I guess what I'm saying is this can't really be, if we want this to be a lightweight function that just kind of does a test and continues, it needs to be something where the debug system can always access the variable very easily. So it needs to be something like, you know, it needs to be something where there's a static, right? It would need to be something like this. So there's a, you know, a debug if that's some name, and it would create some kind of a local, you know, a variable that was locally declared to be persistent. And I don't remember, I feel like we have, yeah, right here. So we have a way to do that. We'd say this is a locally persistent variable. It's like, you know, whatever the debug ID is of this thing or something, right? I don't know exactly what we would want that to be, but we declared some local persist debug ID for this thing, and then we would do, like, only on the initialization pass through the thing, we would do like get debug ID for, you know, parameter or something like this, for, you know, I don't really know, and we'd pass the name. That would be something that on the first pass through, it would call that thing and do the initialization that's necessary, right? And then what we would do is we would switch on the value of that thing. And really this, I guess, wouldn't be a debug ID. It'd be more something like a debug, you know, value. And we would just say, like, OK, whatever this debug value is that we got back. In fact, I might. And again, let that kind of be its own thing. And here, that same deal, right? You can just eliminate a little bit of the complexity in the if case, not a whole lot, but a little bit, right? Again, so in this case, we've got the debug if just has a path. There's the path. The path is something now that you can use directly, so it just has to plus. I feel like maybe that also the variable, because in fact it's not name, I shouldn't say, it's like path. Like it's the path to where that thing exists in the debug hierarchy. So there's the path. And then I've got, you know, this notion that I want to kind of concat these together. So I want the path, then I want a slash, then I want whatever the variable name is. That seems totally reasonable for how that'll get stored. This all works now correctly. Instead of an if now, it's just the type, whatever the type is that you asked for, right? It's the type, then it's going to be whatever the variable is. And then that's going to be equal to whatever this debug value was, dot whatever the accessor type is, right? And that would is something that we probably want to get used to for this stuff to sort of start. This stuff could actually be cleaned up quite a bit if we just unified our naming scheme. And this is something that, again, it's really worth doing. I know it seems like you fuss a lot with these sorts of things, but once you get them right, it's kind of nice to have them right. And so you can see what happened here. Like you can see the way that I was writing this, I just followed our capitalization scheme, which is kind of nice and it makes things look good and all that other stuff. But what you'll notice is these are not programmatically generatable unless you write a metaprogram, obviously. These are not programmatically generatable in the C++ preprocessor, but these would be. Right? As soon as I make the statement that the debug type itself is just the word debug type with something at the end of it that is the actual type, and if I took it one step further and take these guys here and actually made these guys be something like value and then that thing, all of a sudden this becomes a lot more powerful. Because now macros can just pick out the thing that they want all with one go, right? There's no name translation going on. It's always just whatever the thing is, you know, with its type kind of stuck at the end. And I guess rectangle 2 and 3 don't have that underscore there. That's my imagination running wild, not actually true. What can you do? So there you go. Again, that's just a nice little change there. And so that's all kind of nice stuff. That, again, kind of lines that up really nicely. And now when we look at what actually happens in here, in fact, all of this value set event data stuff, right? These horrible languages. Okay. Please, John, if you're listening, a lot of the time in C++. Sorry. You know, not the end of this back, but unfortunately, again, the type that it is or something like that. That is or something like that. That looks pretty good to me, but unfortunately, again, thanks to the magic of C++, I think that does put us back squarely into ridiculous pass-through territory. You know, not the end of the world, but that's just the way it goes sometimes, right? It's just the way it goes a lot of the time in C++. Please, John, if you're listening, finish your language. Please, John, in C++. Please, John, if you're listening, finish your language sometime soon for those of us who are dying out here using these horrible languages. Okay, so inside here where we have the debug variable, now all I'm going to do is the exact same thing. I create a persistent variable of whatever the type is, and then all I need to do after it gets initialized with the name, the difference now is that there's a type in here that's being passed. Then there's the name, and then there's the variable that I actually want to assign to it. So now when we talk about the name, it's not just the name, it's actually also the variable, because in fact it's not name, I shouldn't say, it's like path. Like it's the path to where that thing exists in the debug hierarchy. So there's the path. And then I've got, you know, this notion that I want to kind of concat these together. So I want the path, then I want a slash, unless you write a metaprogram here. Kind of busy work here, nothing particularly interesting, but sometimes you got to do it. Until Mr. Fourth Dimension, nothing particularly interesting. Kind of busy. Rectangle 2. Kind of busy. Rectangle 2. Kind of busy work here, nothing particularly interesting. but sometimes you got to do it. Until Mr. Fourth Dimension finishes his code-based editor, we'll just have to make do. Okay, so correct up here as well. Rectangle 2, rectangle 3. That's not correct. That's good. Rectangle 2, rectangle 3, rectangle 2. Kind of busy work here. Nothing particularly interesting. But sometimes you got to do it. Until Mr. Fourth Dimension finishes his code-based editor, we'll just have to make do. Okay, so they're getting close here to being all good, but we still have a little bit more to go. Let's just go ahead and finish that out. So value underscore bitmap ID is what that has to be. Again, same thing here, value underscore bitmap ID. And these are this actually probably that whole system has sort of been excised and sets us up to just put it through the standard debug event path, right? So tomorrow we'll be able to kind of unify those two systems, which collapses yet another level of complexity down, which is great. So again, I'm really happy with the way this is turning out. I think we're getting there. But it's time to stop. So I will go ahead and go to the Q&A. If you have any questions about what we did today, please feel free to go ahead and I'm just looking here. That's pretty great. I didn't know that you could get the HMH bot to like say something flame baity. That's pretty great. Just looking here. That's pretty great. And I'm just looking. I'm just looking here. That's pretty great. I didn't know that you could get the HMH bot to like say something flame baity. That's pretty great. That is pretty awesome. Let's see. PSI 9 says why. PSI 9, let's see. PSI 9 says, why use get key state instead of WM key down, WM key up? So the answer is because they are modifier keys. So WM key up, WM key down is for letting, is if you're trying, if it's a fundamental thing that you're trying to do, is detect when keys go up and down. Then WM key up and key down are nice because they let you just get directly to the keys as they change, right? They're like, oh, okay, you know, I got a notification that this key changed, and so that was good, and it's all good, right? But in this case, we don't actually care about that, right? In this case, we don't care at all about knowing when the shift key went up or down, knowing when the control key went up or down, or knowing when the alt key went up or down. All we actually care about is every frame when we send the mouse info down, we just want to know whether the control, alt, or shift keys were up or down at that instant in time. And that's exactly what getKeyState is designed to do. It's just designed to tell us that, right? Now there's two kinds. One is called getKeyState, one's called getAsyncKeyState. And if you look at the way they are defined, getAsyncKeyState tells you the state as Windows knows it at the time of the call, whereas getKeyState, not getAsyncKeyState, tells you what your program thinks it was if all you had been doing was looking at the key up, key down messages. So actually, there's really no difference between you tracking key up, key down yourself for shift, control, and alt. Since you're not doing anything when they're pushed, they're not a trigger key. There's no difference between that and you just like manually tracking the bool yourself and just calling getKeyState. So for our purposes, getKeyState is basically perfect. That's exactly what we want to do, right? So there you go. Elvin, I don't have much experience in it, but you mentioned the RTTI in C++ is not as good. Elvin, so there you go. Elvin, I don't have much experience in it, but you mentioned the RTTI in C++ is not as good. Could you explain a bit why? Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons the RTTI in C++ is not as good. One reason is there's no way to like macro between the RTTI and the actual type itself. So it, you know, you can't like have, you couldn't, I'll put it this way. It all stems from the concept that the RTTI is opaque data that you have no way of actually using or accessing. So for example, if you wanted to write two programs, one on Clang and like one on MSVC, and you wanted them to like save out the runtime type information in a way that the other one could read. I don't know if they ever fixed this, probably not, but at least RTTI as it was defined was completely compiler specific. So you have actually no way of really getting a actual value you can use to identify this type in a way that your program can understand. It's strictly like specific to that particular compilation on that particular compiler of that particular program. Furthermore, even separate compiles of the same program are not guaranteed to produce the same RTTI, right? So like it could just be, like one way it could implement RTTI is just a pointer to your V table. Could be the thing that says what this type is, right? And so that's just not usable as a basic system for doing metaprogramming on types, because you want to, one of the first things you're going to want to do with your types is like be able to save them to disk, right? And restore them or something across runs of your program. And that's just not possible with the way they spec the RTTI. Now, whether they fix that in like C++ 2032 or whatever, I'm not sure. But at least up until like, you know, the turn of the millennium, right? Or even the turn of this decade, it was not the case. It just didn't work. Culverfly, I don't quite get why you need to nest the... Culverfly, I don't quite get why you need to nest the macros for debug. Can you explain it? Yeah, it's just because the paste operator pastes the actual macro parameter directly. So let me see if I can and maybe make this a little more clear. What would be the easiest way to do this? Let's see. So let's suppose we were to grab something in the thing with the stuff. All right, so here's a way I could show you pretty cleanly what it is. Let's suppose we're in handmade.cpp, and we go through here and we create some macros. So I'm going to do like a macro called onetime, and here is the parameter, right? And I'm going to say that it is going to be equal to whatever the param is, right? So now I say, okay, I've got a char star one-time result equals one-time foo, right? I'm then going to make a thing called two-time, right? that basically does what we were sort of saying, but with a call through, right? So it does a call through there, and then I'm going to make one called 3time. Arg. I finally, on my Emacs config at work, turned off insert as a key, and it was pretty great. I will tell you that. So anyway, okay, so 3time, there we go, right? And so let's see what these actually do. Each of them produces a string, right? That's the stringizing operator. So it takes whatever the parameter is that you pass. In each case, we pass the same thing, which is foo. The first one turns it into a string. The second one calls a macro, which turns it into a string. The third one calls a macro, which calls a macro, which turns into a string. And so let's just see what those three things actually turn out to be equal to when we run this, right? So I'm going to set a breakpoint in game update and render there. Game update and render. Here we come through. When we step through this, right, we get 1 time result. Oops, 1 time result. 2 time result. 3 time result, right? Okay. So as you can see in here, right, no matter which one we did, they each give us the exact same parameter, right? It's all totally fine, right? So no harm, no foul, everyone's happy. If we need to do something where we just take in a parameter and stringize it, it doesn't matter, right? But now what happens if what we wanted to do, for example, was stringize, say, the file, like whatever we wanted to turn, like, say, or the line number into a string, right? So instead of doing #param here, right, what we actually want to do is this, right? So I want to turn that into it. Now, if you see what happens when I compile here, oh, well, there's okay. So that's the first thing I guess I should mention, and I forget about this all the time. So the first thing is you can't actually do that, right? This pound operator here, it's just a flat out error if you use something that's actually a macro thing in and of itself, right? So one reason to do just the 2-time version is if I needed to pass in the file, right? So if I needed to pass in the file, you can see that would be actually required of me, right? That's something that I'd actually have to do directly. But now that I've got those two, you can see that in this case, what was I going to say? Oh, I guess this is even earlier than I thought it was going to be. I didn't think we were going to quite need it yet. But actually, you can already see it happening. Okay. So if you look at what happened here, right, this was actually surprised me. I never remember exactly. Again, that's why I say it's always kind of an epic nightmare, the C++ preprocessor stuff. But so what happened here, right, is the thing that I was trying to avoid by calling twice in the other ones. Because we passed this in as a parameter, the first attempt in the 2-time version to stringize it, it takes the actual thing you passed in and stringizes that, right? So it's basically replacing param with file, the word, and stringizing that. So instead of getting a string version of the file, right? And I guess saying the file's already a string, so what I should have done here is I should have done this to make it clearer, right? I'm looking for a string that is the line number. That's what I actually want, right? What was I going to say? Oh, I time through when you only call through one. And so as you can see, like the first time through when you only call, that's what I actually want, right? And so as you can see, like the first time through when you only call through one parameter, you actually just, all you get is the line directive turned into a string. Whereas if you call through twice, the first time it replaces param with line, the second time it replaces line with the number and then stringizes it, right? So you get that sort of cascading down. And so for every layer of peeling that you need to do for a parameter, you have to do that. I don't ever remember exactly how it works. I should probably just go read exactly the C++ preprocessor spec, because it's probably like, oh, every expansion, it rewrites each token one time, and so blah, 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 right? There's probably a really easy way to remember it. If you actually go and learn. I never bothered to do so. But that's the problem that you face. right? And so sometimes you have to call it twice, sometimes you don't. Like I said, I don't know that we actually need all three that we had in there. That's why I was saying when I typed it, you could probably get away with 2 for all the stuff we just did, because we never had to pass anything like the file directive or anything into there. You mind going over your debug UI plan for those who don't know what the current plan is? I just want food. You mind going over your debug UI plan for those who don't know what the current plan is? I just want food. I don't have a plan. I'm just making a debug system and seeing what the stuff is that I actually want to know, if that makes sense. So like, I know I want to be able to display debug data. I know I want to be able to display profiling data. We now have both of those. And so I'm just trying to unify them as cleanly as possible, and then make it so that on top of that, the interface is good enough that it's like fast and fluid to get at the data we need. So we're pretty close. It's just the UI now at this point is not as good as it needs to be. So we just need to go refine that debug system to the point where it's nice and fluid to kind of get around it, and then I think we're good. But I don't have a plan for that. I'm just writing the code as I kind of figure it out as I go. Golden WH, isn't metaprogramming a security hole? Golden WH, isn't metaprogramming a security hole? I don't even know what that means. Elvin, I've been reading about the cost of virtual functions. Normal non-virtual functions cost a call command, but with virtual we need 2 fetches and a call. Is that very costly in performance critical areas? Is that the reason to avoid virtuals? For me, I don't like the fact that they introduce hidden costs. Makes it harder to reason about your code. For me, call, is that very costly in performance critical areas? Is that the reason to avoid virtuals? For me, I don't like the fact that they introduce hidden costs. Makes it harder to reason about your code. The reason I don't use virtuals is because I find switch statements to be more usable. So it doesn't have that much to do with the cost of a virtual call. But yes, it is true that virtual calls are much harder to optimize. You know, if you're in the position where you're using a switch statement to determine things, and you find that your code is going too slowly, it's usually not that hard to make that into some kind of a more smart dispatch. And oftentimes the switch isn't expensive because it doesn't have to fetch anything, right? It's just the one fetch. It doesn't have to go fetch and fetch. It just does one fetch, and then the jump can be just sort of like the compiler can often optimize the jump and so on. So switch statements are usually a little bit easier. So it's true that, you know, probably you get some wins with them, but that's not actually why I do them, because you know, I just don't tend to like virtual functions I don't like spreading out the code for a single idea across many files like that. I just don't find it to be that useful. So I don't like virtual functions as an architectural thing. It has nothing to do with the speed. But it is true that the speed can be a problem. I have never actually had that specific experience myself. I've had people say that like virtual functions were really problematic on consoles for them, especially like older consoles like Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3. I've heard nightmares about that. I don't have the personal experience to know how true they were or how relevant that was, or if it was for other reasons that, you know, I don't know. So I don't pretend to say that I have had like lots of experiences optimizing code that had virtual functions in it and it caused me a lot of problems. That's not true. I don't tend to write code that way. I've not had that experience. I don't know. So I think that's probably something that's better for someone else to answer. Probably someone who's done a big C++ project on a console. How much of a problem that is these days would be an interesting question for them. And I would be interested to hear the answer. I just don't use them, so I don't care. But it's definitely different than if statements. You know, it has a different performance profile potentially. Elvin, I can't figure out for the life of me a way to draw an empty I can't figure out. It has a different performance profile potentially. Elvin, I can't figure out for the life of me a way to draw an empty non-filled rectangle via the Win32 API. An empty non-filled rectangle. Oh, you mean like you want to stroke the outline of a rectangle? It's real easy if you do want to do that. Filling a rectangle in Win32, you just don't draw a rectangle. You use move to and line to. So the Win32 API. An empty, non-filled rectangle. Oh, you mean a way to draw an empty, Elvin, I can't figure out for the life of me a way to draw an empty, non-filled rectangle via the Win32 API. An empty, non-filled rectangle. Oh, you mean like you want to stroke the outline of a rectangle? It's real easy if you do want to do that. Filling a rectangle in Win32, you just don't draw a rectangle. You use move to and line to. So like for example, when we put when we do our stretch blit here, right? If you wanted to, you could pretty easily do move to, line to, and if you look at how this works, let's see, move to EX. You can kind of see how this goes. So you can see this here. You basically pass whatever the DC is that you're trying to draw to, which in our case is this one. You pass the two coordinates, so like, 10, 10, or something like that. You can then just do lines to each of the things that you wanted to do, right? So typical rectangle, gonna look something like that, right? Oops, don't need those there. And so that's how you would typically draw a rectangle. You can see it right there. There it is. And that's gonna, I believe, draw it in the current foreground color. So if you need to change the color of the thing, it's pretty straightforward to do. That's just gonna be probably something you can look in here that would tell you all about. It's gonna probably stroke it with the current pen, right? And you can probably set the current pen cheaply. They added some trivial functions for that. It's like set solid pen or something like this. I don't quite remember. Set solid pen 132. Yeah, where is it? It's not. It's like get solid pen 132. It's been so long since I've done any of this stuff. I don't really remember, but you could do all these things. Solid pen color, that's what it is. Solid pen color. This thing, right? So you can call like set DC pen color, and that allows you to kind of like mess with it. So I could say like set DC pen, and That's just going to be probably something you can look in here that would tell you all about. It's going to probably stroke it with the current pen, right? And you can probably set the current pen cheaply. They added some trivial functions for that. It's like set solid pen or something like this. I don't quite remember. Set solid pen 132. Yeah, where is it? It's not, it's like get solid pen 132. It's been so long since I've done any of this stuff. I don't really remember, but you could do all these things. Solid pen color, that's what it is. Solid pen color. This thing, right? So you can call like set DC pen color, and that allows you to kind of like mess with it. So I could say like set DC pen color, device context RGB. You know, here's that lovely yellow I'm so fond of, and I believe don't totally remember, but I believe we then have to select the stock object of the default pen. You see it's still black, right? But you can just do a select object at the beginning before you do anything else. You can do this nonsense to tell the DC that the pen that you're always going to use is going to be that one that I just looked up here. So DC pen, that guy right there. So you just want to do like that, right? And I think that's it, right? And so there's that yellow rectangle, and you can change that as frequently as you want to, and do any of the other stuff in there. So you know, once you have that set up that way, you know, you can even do you can just change it per line. GDI was actually fine, you know, for its day it was a totally fine, you know, is it great? No, but it's totally usable. It's not the world's worst graphics API. So you know, if you I don't know why you would be using it, because it doesn't seem like these days, you know, if you could use OpenGL, you would, but there you go. You can, you know, change the pen per line, or, you know, whatever you want to do. That's fine. So that's, you know, if that's what you're trying to do, that's real easy. That's the easiest way to do it. Defreaky, what are your thoughts on Twitch starting to affect game design? You know, I'm not really a game designer, so I don't, you know, I'm a programmer, and you know, so I mean, I like the fact that I can stream development as a way of teaching, you know, and I like that aspect of Twitch. I don't know much about how Twitch affects game design. I mean, I understand the concept that if people are now saying that like Twitch is a big, or any video streaming service really, is a big way in which games get press, I can understand that people might start designing their games to look good on Twitch or play well on Twitch to an audience or whatever. You know, do I think it's a bad thing? Not really, because anyone who's going to do that, so like, 32, you just don't draw a rectangle. You use move to and line to. So like, for example, when we do our stretch split here, right? If you wanted to, you could pretty easily do move to, line to, and if you look at how this works, let's see, move to EX. You can kind of see how this goes. Whatever the, you know, 10 we wanted, see it right there, and so that's, you know, how you would typically draw a rectangle. And so that's, you know, how you would typically draw a rectangle. You can see it right there. There it is. And that's gonna, I believe, draw it in the current foreground color. So, you know, if you need to change the color of the thing, it's pretty straightforward to do. That's just gonna be probably something you can look in here that would tell you all about. It's gonna probably stroke it with the current pen, right? And you can probably set the current pen cheaply. They added some trivial functions for that. It's like set solid pen or something like this. I don't quite remember. Set solid pen Win32. Yeah, where is it? It's not. It's like get solid pen. Get solid. The Freaky, what are your thoughts on Twitch starting to affect game design? You know, I'm not really a game designer, so I don't, you know, I'm a programmer, and you know, so I mean, I like the fact that I can stream development as a way of teaching, you know, and I like that aspect of Twitch. I don't know much about how Twitch affects game design. I mean, I understand the concept that if people are now saying that like Twitch is a big, or any video streaming service really, is a big way in which games get press, I can understand that people might start designing their games to look good on Twitch or play well on Twitch to an audience or whatever. You know, do I think it's a bad thing? Not really, because anyone who's going to do that probably wasn't super filled with like artistic integrity for their game anyway. Like, that's probably talking about people like Call of Duty, who are just like, we're designing games to be like mass market and super PRable and super marketable, right? And they were already compromising all sorts of things that might have been, you know, interesting about their games in order to sell more copies. The fact that they're gonna maybe compromise those to play better on Twitch is not. It's just 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? They were already marketing-driven games to begin with. So people who are really passionate about a particular game idea and really want to make that game idea, I don't think those people are going to be super affected by Twitch in a negative way. You know, they'll just make their game, and if it plays well on Twitch, it does, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Now, there's a long-term effect that could be deleterious, which is that if it turns out that your game has to play well on Twitch in order to get an audience, then you end up with those people who do have an artistic idea and make games that maybe don't play well on Twitch. If they can't survive, if they can't make a living because now they can't, their game will never sell, those people go away. Now you have lost something, and that's like a systemic effect, like a long-term effect. That's a natural selection effect. That could be bad. But we don't know that that's happening yet, right? And we don't know if that will happen. So it's premature to suggest that that's a problem. So I would say the first order effect doesn't concern me much. It's just people who are already pandering, maybe doing more pandering or something. So the only problem would be if it started to cause like a natural selection effect where games that couldn't play well on Twitch disappear. That would be sad. But I don't know that that's going to happen. You know, so far I would say if anything, Twitch has been having a positive effect for obscure games sometimes, because more people are watching games, which means that more people are seeing games streamed, which means that there's more possibilities for them to find out about games that they weren't finding out about. So far, I would say I don't think Twitch is affecting systemically game design in a bad way. It may actually be having a positive effect, but again, a lot of that's too early to tell. Since I'm not a game designer, don't have a strong opinion about it. That's just my knee-jerk reaction. Boondoggle42, could you list the important Boondoggle42, could you list the important features a good graphical debugger should have? I mean, what you see me using on Handmade Hero is the bare minimum. Like, your thing should be able to do everything that I'm doing in Visual Studio. It should have the memory display window, it should have a quick updating watch window, which Visual Studio doesn't have, unfortunately. It should be faster than Visual Studio, hopefully. But it should have a watch window that's really easy to use, saves my state from run to run, right? So I shouldn't have to re-add my variables or whatever. It should be trivial to close and restart the program quickly. It should never crash. It should never like hang up the graphics system or anything like that. Linux fails on both of those counts. It should always be able to inspect all my debug variables. That's a big problem with a lot of graphical front ends on Linux, is they can't inspect unions and stuff like this. Even though GDB can, it's weird. They have these weird like bugs. Local variables cause problems. So yeah, just a reasonable implementation of what Visual Studio does is the bare minimum. And that right now we don't really have anywhere other than Visual Studio, which is kind of sad. Casto5, are you one of those that thinks that Casto5, are you one of those that thinks that previously DirectX was better than OpenGL, but now is the opposite? I don't think I've ever thought that DirectX was better than OpenGL. Kemosabi76, do you know how far has Kemosabi76, do you know how far has metaprogramming come along in other fields? I can imagine research using genetic algorithms to self-enhance code. I do not know anything about that, no. All right. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and spin things down. Let's go ahead and spin things down. Okay. So, thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code, so if you want to play around with it, follow along at home, that is the place to do that. So, yeah, we also have a forum site. You can go to ask questions, and there's an annotated episode guide up there. We also have a Patreon page you can pledge to if you want to support the video series. We have a tweetbot you can go to if you want to check the schedule. And we have a conference now. So if you want to go to handmadecon.org, you can read about that. It's got a pretty awesome speaker list as well. It's pretty much my dream list of speakers. It's basically 5 people who I really want to talk about programming, who do exactly the kind of programming that we talk about on Handmade Hero here. And so definitely check that out if you want to. It's more information's on the mollyrocket.com webpage there. So yeah, check that out. We still have some tickets left. They are selling off pretty fast, so I don't know how much longer there will be tickets left. But check it out. They're not very expensive, and we'd love to see you there. That's about it for today. I will see you guys back here tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Until then, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.